The question is that the House to now adjourn, and I call the member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I have the pleasure tonight to discuss my experience of travelling through my electorate last week. Deputy Speaker, I have the largest federal electorate in the Southern Hemisphere, and I don't need to tell you, who also has a large electorate, that to be an effective representative, we have to keep moving. We've got to be on the go all the time in order to travel vast distances. So on Monday last week, I was in Kununurra in the East Kimberley, attending a forum for the Northern Australian local governments. It really was a fantastic and robust forum where we explored the many issues faced by growing and improving communities in the northwest of this country. I presented on what we could collectively do to improve the Shire's access to federal infrastructure grant funding. These types of grants are of vital importance to grow infrastructure and investment and encourage people to permanently move to some of the most remote but also the most beautiful parts of Western Australia. My colleague and friend Senator Linda Reynolds delivered a very thoughtful address on the current and future defence presence in the northwest, how local and state governments can best encourage increased defence industry and defence personnel locally, and the federal government's record planned defence spending. I also had the pleasure of visiting the Kununurra Clontarf Academy, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Matthew Harndorf for organising this really fabulous visit, as well as all the boys for presenting me with my very own signed Clontarf footy. How excited was I? I took the opportunity to ask the boys about what they would do if they were Prime Minister for the day. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, I was really blown away and was quite touched by most of their responses. These students almost exclusively spoke about wanting to help other young Indigenous kids access the same services and education that they themselves were experiencing. And they wanted all their friends to have the same experience, and they also wanted their schools to have greater resources. And sadly, more than one student said that if they were Prime Minister for a day, they would make sure all the kids would be safe at home at night. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, heartbreakingly, there are behind closed doors real and systemic family violence issues in country Australia, and Indigenous kids are often, sadly, the victims. Deputy Speaker, this is one of the reasons why I pushed so hard for the introduction of the cashless welfare card in a number of locations around my electorate. And, Deputy Speaker, that includes Kununurra, where indeed I was visiting these young people. Because we know this parliament does have an obligation to keep those kids safe and to help them thrive, and certainly we're seeing that currently with the use of the cashless welfare card. I then had the opportunity to travel to Karratha, which was some 1,800 kilometres away, with my colleague, the Senator and Minister for Education and Women's Interests, Michaelia Cash. We had the pleasure of attending a lunch with a group of local businesswomen. I'd like to thank the CME representative Nicole Rourke for organising, and the representatives from Yarra Fertilisers, CITIC Pacific, Woodside Chevron and Rio Tinto for attending. Deputy Speaker, we discussed a variety of topics, but chief among them were the federal government's reforms to childcare, the challenges faced by women in the workplace, as well as the good news about the increased funding for WA schools by this federal government. We also had the opportunity to drop in and speak to the Year 11 and 12 girls at the Karratha Senior High School. Pleasingly, the Karratha Senior High School is going to receive $17 million in extra federal money under the Coalition's full Gonski school funding arrangements. I'd like to thank the Principal, Jennifer McMahon, for her hospitality and generosity, and all the girls for their optimism and positivity. We spoke to these bright young women about their hopes and aspirations for the future and their plans post-high school, and it was inspiring to hear these young women talk, with the vast majority of them heading to university in the city in Perth, but also beyond. It was an opportunity for me to explain to them that the federal government has committed another $15 million to the Geraldton University Centre model, which is based in my electorate, which was very pleasing. And then once I left the girls in Karratha, I then travelled to Geraldton, where I had the opportunity to speak with the Geraldton University Centre about the commitment of the federal government and also their plans for the Pilbara. So those girls in Karratha, maybe in a few years' time, their sisters, their brothers, they might have the chance to study at home, and that would be a fabulous outcome, Mr Deputy Speaker.